Alright,
Right.
let's go. Did you start recording?
Yep.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Chimp Talk. I'm your host, Sam Afshipur. I am here with Milad Alamkhani. Did I say it properly?
Yeah.
Yes.
You nailed it.
Awesome. What are you checking on your phone?
I'm just connecting to Wi-Fi, making sure.
Okay, so you can look up things as I.
Sure.
Okay, is that what? Okay, so do you wanna? Should we start off by telling people how we know each other?
Yeah, we could do that.
You want to? You want?
Yeah, sure. So I met Sam, I think, a month ago, right? And we work together right now. We work at Goldcast, doing video editing and that kind of stuff. And we've had some deep conversations about all kinds of stuff: philosophy, psychology, politics, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, yesterday we talked about the porn industry. I don't know. I know that you don't necessarily want to go too deep into that.
Yeah. It's not like a big deal. It's not like a stigma, but it's just I'm making a film about it. So I don't want to kind of like give away grains of, interesting facts that I'm going to have in the film, if that makes sense.
Right.
So, if you want, I can gloss over it, but I'm not going to go into detail.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't need you to go into detail, but I want you to kind of like briefly talk about it.
Okay.
Just so that I could follow up with the question of what effects do you think it has on men that are negatives? So just briefly, talk about
that
it.
I can do.
Okay, cool.
So just to give context, I worked as a video editor in the porn industry for about a year, but I wasn't. So the way it works is that the company outsources a lot of the post-production to a facility in Montreal. So there's like hundreds of just people in Canada editing for different brands, right? And I used to be a video editor for about 8 months. And my experience there was pretty weird / interesting. So I started to notice certain effects that it could have on generally males, but I think females as well. I think you can have those negative kind of effects, right? So I'm not really I'm not going to be anti-porn, but I'm anti-mainstream porn in the sense that I feel like the way things are handled and the lack of ethics behind it really damages overall a guy's mental health, right? But yeah, so I just worked there for about 8 months. It was kind of like, that documentary Super Size Me with McDonald's? It was literally, it felt like that in the sense that I was eating McDonald's every day and I start to see the real world consequences and effects on my own mental health and the way I would just perceive the world and relationships and all that stuff. So yeah, it's not very good. And there's good porn out there too. There's feminist porn. So there's porn that's healthy, but overall the mainstream stuff, and I'm not going to name any brands because of NDAs that I've signed, but overall I'd say it just just the idea of how it's kind of portrayed, this fantasy of what guys kind of want, and yet reality never kind of matches up to that, right? So that in itself is an issue, right?
Because you never fulfill your fantasy, so you're always left disappointed in a way.
There's that aspect of it too, but I think if you look at mainstream porn now, they're kind of pushing the boundaries of the stories. So there's a lot of fringe fetishes, stepsister, stepbrother, stepmother, and if you see that pattern's been growing, and it's because the porn industry has kind of realized, oh wow, this really sells. We get more people watching it. And they don't really understand why, but because they just care about making money and getting more people watching it, they just keep on pushing, the envelope and stuff. And it's not good, man. I feel like right now, in terms of what's happening socially, we have real world experience kind of demonstrating how maybe the porn that guys consume is causing more issues of this in the real world, and in the sense of the Me Too movement, or even yesterday I read an article about how this girl was raped by her Uber driver in Miami, right? And the details were just kind of really shook me. And then when they arrested the guy, he was just that's perks of being an Uber driver, you get pussy. That's what he literally said to the cops when they arrested him, right? And I'm when I think about some of the storylines that the porn industry kind of propagates and kind of builds in that kind of fantasy world, that's one of them. Whether it's you're a boss at a corporate job, and then you exploit some sort of your employee who's dressed scantily or whatever, or even there's so many of these fantasies, these male fantasies, and I feel like as men, we don't really see how that could really, affect us in the real world and cause more issues and more dysfunction, right? So there's definitely, it's like an untouched conversation, because I mean, one, I think, it's kind of a stigma, and two, like, I feel like, for example, the feminist movements, it's easy to judge like these isolated cases and these guys who do these things, but they don't really attack the cause, or even like the cultural movements behind it. Like, you don't really see them attacking rappers who are kind of doing that kind of stuff, because you know what I mean,
they're rapping about it,
not even just rapping about it, but I guess I mean, like, if you look at how much of that can affect a young guy's upbringing, right? When a rapper's like, yo, bitches and hoes, and then you're a 15-year-old kid, you're like, bitches and hoes, right? It's like, man, you don't see the movement going after that because it's so normalized, right? And I think porn is another example of that, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know, man. It's definitely something. But I'm making a film about it sometime in the next year or so, and then a lot of that will be kind of talked about in that project. But
I remember asking you yesterday if the pornos were I believe it's filmed in Europe, where the guy approaches a girl and is in the street and like picks her up, and then like they hook up. It looks so real because it was filmed in such an amateur way, where it's like a POV. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're allowed to say this, but you were telling me how that's fake. It's
everything you see in porn is generally fake.
Everything is fake. And you went into details about like the types of editing that you would have to do in order to clean up a scene, or all the broken dicks and bleeding assholes, and like you would see,
to be specified, just one broken dick.
There was one broken dick. And then man, it's crazy how like so flawed it is in a way, you know what I mean? And you don't see that as a viewer. You don't see all the mistakes, you don't see all the nastiness behind and like all the nastiness behind the scenes, but you got to like witness that. And it's crazy that we got somewhat of an inside view of like what type of nasty shit that we see in the porn industry.
I mean, like, I don't think it's really just the porn industry. I think it's everything. You know, like, I think we live in such a fake world right now, and even social media is a good example of that, right? And I mean, it's kind of sucks for guys, because I feel like when they watch that kind of stuff, they really, I mean, there's a part of you that starts to really believe that's reality. But even like, I mean, if you think about all your sexual experiences, I mean, not all of them are great. There's a lot of shitty ones. There's a lot of awkward ones, right? I mean, even sex in itself, like, you can't really smell what a set smells like when you're watching a video because you're not there. But right. It's pretty gross, actually. It's not very, that pleasant in some cases, right?
Okay, like as much as we know about how nasty like it could get, what were some like effects that you felt like men were having? Well, yourself, actually, speak about yourself and what you felt like it did to your mental health.
Well, one, I mean, like, when you're watching that kind of stuff, it's like constant hits of dopamine, right? So I mean, it's almost like you're bathing your brain in chemicals, and because I was doing that so often, like, that's what it felt like. I'd finish a shift and like I'd be going home, and I felt like I was floating, like it was just a very weird kind of like chemical, biological, overall like feel. In terms of what it did, it just also made me really depressed, and like made me really constantly hypersexualize reality and like objectify girls all the time. And
what type of effect you felt like it had on like your dating life during that time?
It's just that, like, well, first off, like, my ability to relate to a woman was hugely diminished, right? So it's just like, I noticed that even like, if you want to call it performance in terms of how I would express myself to a woman would deteriorate. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't present. I wasn't able to kind of just be myself. There was this, and I feel like there's this emotion of like shame behind porn almost, or like that kind of porn, right? Like, how do I explain?
So like watching it, or
I mean watching it too, because I feel like there's no guy that watches it that feels positive about watching it, right. Like, after you watch porn, like most guys, they kind of just feel kind of disgusted with themselves. They're like, oh, what did I just do? I spent my afternoon doing that, you know what I mean? But then that's why it kind of becomes an addiction to an extent, because when you feel like, they kind of, like, psychologists have kind of, they have theories that the root cause of all addiction is the feeling, an emotion of shame, right? So when you feel ashamed, it's such a horrifying feeling to experience that you kind of use a mood alter to avoid that feeling. So that's why you get into cycles of, acting out, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or even porn addiction or sex addiction, right? There's actually a great film about this called Shame, right? Directed by Steve McQueen. And he kind of tries to understand and kind of show what it feels like for a man to have sex or porn addiction, right? And it's a great kind of character study in that. But I think that's what it is. Like, you start to feel that overall, because I think at the end of the day, like, we're kind of biologically hardwired to want to, procreate, have sex, and like engage with a female as men, right? So then when you're engaging with them but not really engaging with them, you're engaging with them in this like fantastical virtual kind of, I don't know, realm. There's this level of just like toxicity that you feel about yourself, like, and that affects your self-esteem. You can become depressed and whatnot. So I mean, there's a lot of issues with it. Like, I feel like in general, even if guys, like, there's that whole no fap movement too, and like guys have talked about how like, yo man, I did this, and like, I feel so much better, I feel more confident, and that stuff affects a guy's overall self-esteem, right? So I'd say those are definitely some of the negative effects of it.
Right. Yeah. I did no fap for about 8 months. Yeah. And then I quote unquote relapsed, but I'm not relapsed in the sense that I was addicted before, but it was a part of my life, like a lot of people it was, So and then I watched it again, and then I went back to like no fap, quote unquote. But no fap for me was just not watching porno, right? Yeah. Because I felt like you couldn't, like, I was at a stage where I couldn't imagine like a female and getting aroused like by myself with my imagination myself, and then I'm like, okay, this is an issue. And I also realized that porn makes you it gives you the impression that every girl is like getting like gangbanged, like, you know what I mean, on her weekend. So you talk okay. to women in a way that is like, okay, yeah, like I watch porno, I know exactly like what you've been up to, you know what I mean? Like, you feel like you almost feel like every girl is a hoe, and that's why I stopped watching porno. And also it desensitizes you. It desensitizes you in the sense that, like, you see naked women all the time on your laptop, so you're less motivated to pursue women in real life.
Well, so, I think it also, you mentioned something, and you're like, so I think it affects the way you perceive sex, right? So I mean, as guys, we're visual, right? Generally speaking, but the thing is that, can you remember the last time you had sex where it was more emotional or intimate than it was a visual kind of experience, right? Can you, or no?
No. Well, it goes way back.
That's what I'm saying. And I feel like it's tough for guys now to kind of think of that, an experience where it was like that. And then usually when the guy brings it up, they're like, oh, it was that one girl who I was madly in love with, and I was able to be myself and vulnerable and all that stuff, right? So I want you to think about that for a sec, because I feel like that is what healthy sex is supposed to be like, It's supposed to be an intimate emotional experience, not just like this instant gratification where you get it out of your system, then you feel kind of, it's like this dirty high almost, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, and I think this kind of stuff and like everything else that we're, subjected to in the media is making it worse, right? So I think these are definite issues that we can actually, see just in male culture and whatnot. And like, it goes back to all these issues we're having now. It's like everyone's blaming, isolated incidents, or like they'll be like, oh, it's the patriarchy, it's like misogyny. And those are not really tangible things that you can kind of pinpoint and correct. They're just kind of like these...
a behavior
it's just like an abstract system, right? And you lose context and tangibility because you're just blaming like this invisible dragon as the, the enemy. And then when someone kind of does behavior that resembles those systems, then you kind of be like, you're just doing that, you're encouraging the patriarchy or misogyny or whatever, which is, I think there's truth to that. But I mean, none of it happens in a vacuum. I mean, there's always like a cause and effect. There's always a root cause. And I feel like right now as a society, we fail to look at root causes and correct these issues, like, I mean, there's not one issue either. There's multiple factors. Like we just talked about one of them, right? Like whatever, maybe porn or something like that. But even like it goes deeper in our psychology, our biology, or our chemistry is like, you know, guys or whatever. So I don't know, man. It's a complicated issue, but definitely I'd encourage guys, like, if you can't not watch porn, then just like ration how much you watch, right? And at the end of the day too, like, you'll notice when you stop watching it, you just feel better, you know? Like, I haven't really watched it in a long time. I don't watch it anymore. It just, for me, it's like eating junk food, you know? Like, when you eat junk food, you feel good in the moment, but you feel like crap afterwards, right? And, you know, like, there's this huge movement with guys of like, yo, eat healthy, you know, go to the gym. So think of it like that when it comes to sex. Like, promote healthy kind of like lifestyles for that, for that area too, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy how like porn didn't get any backlash when it came to the behavior of men towards women, in the sense like with the whole Me Too movement, like porn wasn't even mentioned. Like, porn had nothing to do with it, but it did some conditioning to men. Like, men believed that women wanted to be treated in that way, you know what I mean? Where like you see the most perverted things like on websites, on porno websites and whatnot. So like, men were convinced that women wanted to be treated in such a diminishing way, and it's crazy. Like, I want to talk about a personal experience that I had, and to show like the type of conditioning that went into me. Like, I was talking about this, and I was saying how like for me it was normal to like slap a girl in the ass, right? But and there was this one girl that was just like, what are you doing? Like, what the fuck are you doing? But I was so conditioned to believing that, you know, it was a regular thing to me. Like, it's just like I thought it was like, I didn't even, when she said, what are you doing, I didn't even know like that's what she was referring to. That's how conditioned I was. You know what I mean? So there's that, but to even higher, like, it
can get much worse.
It could get much worse than that. But that was just an example of how conditioned I was, and I was just like, oh shit, okay, this might not be normal for every girl. You know what I mean? Oh yeah, and she was telling me how like no man has ever slapped her like that. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh fuck, maybe I'm fucked up. You know what I mean? So yeah, that was one experience. But yeah. Anyways, do you feel like the Me Too movement has had a positive impact on men? And,
I mean, on men or in general?
On the way men behave towards women. Are they more prudent?
Well, I feel like it depends on how you phrase the question. So I think it's positive in the sense that it's conversations that weren't had that are being had, and it's basically we've like removed like the veil with issues that were there for probably centuries, you know? So I think it's a positive thing overall. I don't think it's completely and utterly positive in the way it's happening right now. But I mean, that's how progress works. You have to take 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, and then 5 steps forward. That's how progress, you know, or growth happens. But overall, I think it is a positive thing. I think it really also, like, yeah, a lot of guys complain about like, oh, you know, I'm afraid to talk to a girl. I'm afraid to do this. But at the end of the day, man, like, I think it's whatever. Like, I mean, it's a good thing because it allows guys to be self-aware now with things that for them were automatic, like you mentioned, like slapping the butt. If you didn't get feedback, negative feedback from the girl, could you have been self-aware to be like, yo, is that really me or was that my conditioning?
Yeah.
You couldn't, right? Yeah. So not all negative feedback towards a guy is a bad thing, right? So I think it's actually a good thing. I just feel like guys are kind of complaining a bit too much about it because they're afraid. But honestly, another thing that I always bring up is I feel like guys really suck at reading social cues, right? So when I hear my guy friends talk about how they're on a date and, you know, they're with a girl and, you know, all of a sudden, like, it's near the end of the day and they go in for a kiss or whatever and she rejects them, and I'm like, well, did you see any signs that she was interested? And you're like, I don't know, we're on a date. And I was like, well, I mean, you could be on a date but a girl might not be interested. You have to be able to read her, right? I mean, there's so many ways you can read her to know if she's interested or not. And I think that's the thing, like, guys are, I really don't know if it's biological, man, or if it's just like the way we're raised, right? But I don't want to say it's biological because I feel like maybe it's a combination, you know?
Yeah, it's a combination. It's also very social. I remember like just being friends with a girl when I was younger, and my guy friends shaming me that I was friends with her. And saying, yo, what the fuck you doing? Yo, you can't be friends with a girl. Or, you know, they shame me to the point that, like, so much so that I wanted to prove myself to my friends, to my guy friends so badly that, like, I pulled a move on a girl that was my friend and ruined that relationship. You know what I mean? So I feel like the guys, we shame each other too we you know what I mean, we shame each other, like especially when I was in like high school and whatnot. It was all about getting the validation of your friends, and it still is to a certain extent. And every time I catch myself in the realm of, oh, I'm gonna get the validation of, I don't know, my friends, my coworkers, or whatever it is, I try to catch myself fantasizing in that realm of validation, and I'm like, yo, dude, like, stop. This is not what you actually want. This is just something that your ego wants. Yeah, you know what I mean. Your ego wants to be accepted, and every time my intentions are in the place of where I want validation, I always end up falling flat on my face, because I feel like the root intention is not a good intention to have, to seek that validation, like from others. But yeah, that's that.
Well, I think, I mean, it's really just masculinity, right? Like the ideas of it. So I don't want to say that, you know, I hate it when people say kind of masculinity is wounded, or masculinity is toxic, or all masculinity is toxic, right? It's not fair to say that, because there's a lot of great things about masculinity, right? But I feel like there are foundations of it that need to be reformed, because there's a lot of stuff wrong with it, right? And I feel like something that we all share as men is like this just masculine shame that we feel for being men almost, you know what I mean? Like, and we need to kind of find a way to redefine what it means to be masculine, you know?
But yeah, that's the issue also. I feel like we don't know what it is. Like, we don't have a definition of masculinity.
Everyone has their own, but there's also like archetypes of what masculinity is. And like, I see these movements online, you know, like the Joe Rogan movements or the Jordan Peterson movements, and all these movements stem from, you know, just masculinity, a lack of that, and also not knowing what it is, and the wound underneath of it, right? Like, one of my favorite films has always been Fight Club, and Fight Club was about the idea of finding out what masculinity is, redefining it, right? And I mean, as crazy, as old as it is as a film, it's always relevant to it, because I think this has been a conversation that's been going on for so long. And like, you know, every young boy is struggling to figure out how they're supposed to be in the world, you know? Like, you're kind of taught that you need to be, you know, strong, macho, grounded, you know, not emotional, successful, make a lot of money, all these different like pressures that you're kind of thrown onto your shoulders. And from a young age, you realize you can't be you, right? Like you said, you just had a female friend and you were cool with her. She was your friend. But then that, you know, social pressure from your, you know, masculine group and whatnot, they kind of pressured you to be like, no, you have to be the hyper masculine macho guy that gets girls and screws every girl that he meets, right? So then you ended up doing something that wasn't honest to you and authentic to who you were. Exactly. And, you know, you ended up losing a friend over it, right? So these are the ways that these issues kind of influence us. And, you know, like, I think every guy in their 20s, like, I think being a guy in your 20s is so hard, man. Like, you're trying to figure out how you're supposed to be. And like, I remember my early 20s was just a shit show, man. Like, especially because for me personally, I'm more sensitive and emotional. So being a guy and having those traits, it's so hard. Because like, even if you're on a date, the moment you show any kind of lack of, I guess, groundedness, right, as a young guy dating, it's very tough, you know? Like, you're supposed to kind of be stoic all the time. Or maybe that's what I believed, because that's what I was taught, and maybe that was all just BS, you know? But it's tough. We're constantly trying to figure out what it is. And I think now is an interesting time, because I've noticed that guys are kind of starting to be more open about it and open up to each other. Like, I feel like before it was very tough for guys to have some sort of intimacy, quote unquote, right? Whatever that means for a guy, you know? But I think now there's like a counter movement to this whole like, oh, guys can't be emotional or sensitive or vulnerable. You know what I mean? But I don't know. It's an ongoing thing, dude.
Do you feel like it is actually a hard time to be dating if you're a millennial? I feel like Vice is always trying to convince us that it's a difficult time for millennials to be dating.
Well, I don't really. I feel like Vice is a lot of complaining. They do a lot of complaining, to be honest. But I think it's true. I mean, it's very complex now, the dating world. Whereas like back in the day, you would just marry your neighbor, or like you get an arranged marriage and it was over. Like there was no power dynamic. There was no like, oh man, like I have to make sure I don't text her back right away. She doesn't think that I'm needy or whatever. None of that bullshit, right?
Right. It's a competition of who cares the less. Like
and I hate that, because everyone's just playing themselves when they say I care less, you know? Everyone cares. You know, it's normal to care. And like everyone's just like playing this game, wearing these masks, and like I think it can get more or less worse depending on where you're dating. Like I feel like, and maybe I'm being biased, but I feel like North America, is particularly like the US and like the city I'm from, Toronto, is horrible with that kind of stuff. It's just like, you know, power dynamics. That's what dating is, you know? And part of me also feels like maybe it's an age thing. Maybe majority of people, when they hit their 30s and they realize they're getting old, they'll be like, I'm sick and tired of this shit, no more games. And you just kind of commit. And you see that happening with people who get married in their 30s and they kind of settle instead of like, oh, I'm waiting for the next best thing, you know?
There's also an abundance of choice too.
Yeah.
I think there's a psychologist that coined the term. I think it was the paralysis of choice, or I don't know. I forgot what it was.
I've heard of this.
But yeah, having choice is good, but having too much choice is not good.
Yeah.
In the sense that like you never decide because there's just an abundance of people to pick from, and you're just like, you always feel like you could get better, so you never end up picking anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, it's definitely a thing. I mean, how many people have been seeing someone, but you kind of keep it open because in the back of your head, you're like, what if something better comes along, you know? Because there is so much choice. And I feel like with social media, you have that choice every day at the click of a button, you know?
Yeah.
Like you're constantly seeing different types of girls or different kinds of types of guys with different lives, better lives, more successful, all that nonsense, right?
Yeah, that's why Instagram was driving me fucking crazy, man. I deleted that app, but a part of me every time wants to go back, and like sometimes I have like a really interesting day where I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to this event, it's super cool, I'm with cool people, and a part of me wants to like share that with the world. I don't know why, like just because, just to know that like, I don't know, people watched it or whatnot, and I'm like, but not only that, I always catch myself comparing myself to other people. It's like, oh shit, this person has a better career. Oh shit, this person has the most perfect looking relationship. Oh shit, it's because you're always stuck in that realm of like comparing yourself to other people's, you know? And that's why I feel like Instagram is like one of the worst. That's why I just fuck with Facebook and Snapchat right now.
But you know, I'll be honest with you, all that stuff that all those people you compare to, what you see is a lie, right? Because I did a project where I wanted to do that exactly, because I felt I was falling into that trap too, where I was kind of comparing myself to other people's progress in life or whatever, right? And I was just curious about, you know, whether this is actually accurate or not. So then I chose like 25 random people I didn't know through social media. I just know their Instagrams. I messaged them and I was like, let me interview you. I want you to, you know, share something vulnerable about yourself that doesn't, you know, appear on your social media. And dude, like I interviewed, you know, a model who looked like she had the perfect life, a male model who seemed like he was getting all this tail, right? A guy who's an entrepreneur and he had like 7 startups and he looked like he was the next Steve Jobs, all these people. And when I got to meet them and I would ask them like really deep, vulnerable, you know, penetrating questions, it was like cognitive dissonance, because in on the surface I thought they were this kind of image of a person. This was their life, they were happy, this, that. But then when I saw how much they were struggling, man, like all of them, not one was what they appeared to be on their social media, right? And that really changed the way I look at it. Now when I see anything on Instagram, I know that it's just one layer, one shade of that person, right? I mean, if you look at your Instagram, if someone else looked at your Instagram, you'd be like, yo, this guy's life is freaking cool. He seems to be doing this, he's doing that. Yo, I kind of wish I was like him, you know? I kind of wish I was like Sam or whatever. And like, they don't see that, you know, your life sometimes can be boring. Your life can kind of be, you know, depressing or whatever. It's just part of life. Life is not supposed to be constantly happy. It's not supposed to be a social media highlight reel. That's not how it works, right? Yeah. So I think it really boils down to kind of realizing that and understanding it. And once you understand it, it doesn't faze you anymore. Because once I did that project, it didn't faze me. If I saw someone, you know, let's say I saw another filmmaker, they were in a film festival, right? And I'm like, but I'm not in a film festival right now, right? It doesn't faze me, because I'm like, everyone has a different, you know, place and time for what they want to get, right? And even, you know, I remember I was at a film festival one time and I posted, yo, I'm at a film fest. And the reality was it wasn't that great of a film fest, right? But because it was the idea or image of being at a film festival, people filtered that and interpreted it as like, oh shit, this guy's, you know, living it up, you know, it's super successful, right? So it really just depends how you relate to it, right? And you just have to catch yourself when you fall into that trap, try and find a way to kind of, you know, manage it, deal with it, or, you know, reframes are great, right? The moment you start comparing yourself to them, right, switch your perception. Just be like, okay, what does this person not have that I have, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, but it's hard to always like reframe and whatnot. And I also need my Instagram. Like whenever I'm done filming a podcast, for instance, I need to like publish it. You know what I mean? I need to put it out.
You need it for your freaking work and your business, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm in the whole business of publishing like the work I do and whatnot. But yeah, so I guess I told myself like I'll turn on my Instagram whenever I need to publish something. Mm-hmm. Those are the rules that I set for myself.
Yeah, you ration yourself. You don't have to be on it 24/7, right? Yeah, because remember, like it's like a slot machine, these social media apps, right? So you don't want to constantly be on it. Be on it like once or twice a day, max. Right. That's it.
Anyways, I know that you've been editing for a very long time, and there's a bunch of documentaries that you're working on or that you've worked on before. What's one of your favorite like documentaries that you've worked on, or any type of work that you worked on?
Favorite? I mean, I'm currently working on a documentary. It's a docufiction, so it's a blend of fiction and documentary, right? In the sense that you don't know what you're watching, right? You don't know if it's real or fake. And it's a film that was shot in Iran, and it basically kind of follows one character who used to have like this hero when he was a kid, and the hero was like this big famous thug / I guess gangster. I don't know how to translate it properly, right, in English, but back then in the 50s, like the thugs were kind of like the mafiosos of that society, and they were so powerful that they can even like influence political elections and whatnot, right? So the story basically follows this one character who had this one big thug save him from poverty, and he's trying to find out more about him because he doesn't know that much. So he goes in and starts interviewing every thug that's still alive, who's like in their 80s, on the verge of dying and stuff, and he's just trying to figure out who this person is, right? And we're calling the film Elephant in the Dark Room after Rumi's famous poem, right, about a bunch of like scholars and academics trying to figure out what this creature is in this dark space, and they each grab like, a limb, like a trunk, a tail, the body, or the torso or whatever, and each of them can't figure out what this creature is because they're just grabbing one aspect of it. And the film is kind of like that, right?
So do you film the interviews that you do with the ex-thugs?
I only edited this one. So there's another director who shot it, and he gave me the footage, and I've been working on it for about 2 years now, right?
Damn.
Yeah, so we're almost done, and we're going to send it out to festivals next year, but it's the one I've been working on that I think has the most value in terms of storytelling right now, right? And it's cool too because I'm really a big fan of like blending truth and reality, reality and fantasy, right? Or like truth and lie, because I feel like most people take for granted that distinction, but I feel like it's like the lines are more blurred than most people want to kind of indulge or kind of accept. And there's a lot of great films that do that. Like Iranian cinema is known to do that, right?
Right.
They always blend, the line between the two.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I stopped watching that shit ever since it made me like super depressive.
Yeah. There's a lot of freaking sad Iranian movies.
The saddest movies on earth are Iranian movies. Do not watch them.
But they're good though. They're sad, but they're good.
Man. Yeah, but they go so deep into like the human struggle and suffering. Yeah. They go like
it's always like a kid. It's like a kid who wants something, and then like
he can't have
it, and then he just cries, and then you just cry with him. It's like it's horrible, but like. Yeah.
Okay, so this documentary, so you're mixing up interviews with storytelling?
So yeah, what we're doing is we're using real people, but we're manipulating and fabricating the story and what they say for the agenda of the narrative that we're building in post-production. So, I mean, there's a lot of ethical issues with that kind of stuff because you're misrepresenting things, right? But the whole point is to do that because that's one of the themes of the film, right? I don't want to kind of spoil it, but yeah, that's what we've been doing overall. Yeah,
man, I'm excited to see that.
Yeah.
Damn, man, I can't believe you have time to edit outside of work because we already edit like 40 hours.
Dude, right now I don't because I was working like freelance for 2 years, so I had the time. But now like I've been trying to work on it for like a month and I haven't had any time, right? So I'm gonna try and set aside some hours during the weekends.
But the last thing you want to do as an editor is go home and edit more.
Like for me, tell me about it.
For me, at least, the last thing I want to do is edit more. Even if it's my own podcast, I'm like, fuck this. I don't want to edit my own shit.
Just throw it all out there. Yeah.
I don't want to listen to myself. And yeah. but I force myself to do it because I just feel like I could learn something from listening to myself and like the mistakes I do. Yeah, I realize how often I say like or sometimes I swear. My friends told me that I should stop swearing.
No, I noticed that too when I was doing interviews, because I would do interviews and I would write them. And as I would write them, because I would be the one asking the question, but also what I would do is I wouldn't really use what they said verbatim. I would kind of I would understand what they were saying, and then I would write it myself. And it was like an exercise for me because I could kind of get better at writing people's dialogue, right? But then I noticed that I use certain words in all of like the answers to the interview questions. Like I use the word just a lot, JUST. And I was like, man, not everyone uses it. That's my way of speaking kind of like coming in. So then you become aware of these, like the words you use, and you're like, I feel like I really want to kind of I feel like it's really tough to be original in general. Like think about it. How many of your thoughts are really original, right?
Probably none.
Majority of people's thoughts are not original at all. Like it's just copies of copies of copies because we're just social and everything we learn in terms of knowledge came from someone else, right? So I always try and find ways to have or find a way to kind of have some sort of original thought or do something original, I don't know, and just in daily life, right? Something that just comes from you in the moment instead of it being kind of given to you by someone else, an experience or something you learned, But yeah.
What were we trying to say?
We can hear the rubbing between the beard and the headphones.
Is it?
Okay, yeah. Okay, from the headphones.
The static noise that you were hearing in the headphones, that's essentially that.
Okay, I didn't even notice.
Middle Eastern beards, man.
I was just listening to him talk. Anyways,
but you can hear me okay with the mic, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
All right, cool.
I
Okay, so
can hear it correctly, and I'm always adjusting the volume.
Okay.
What's one of the craziest things you've ever done?
Craziest?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, in terms of craziest, like, okay, so when I finished film school, I had such an inferiority complex and like a desperate ambition to be the greatest filmmaker ever that instead of just doing a normal short film like a normal person, I decided to make my first film a 30-minute film in a country where I've never been to, with a language I don't speak, with more than 30 characters that were all kids and more than 15 locations with over 400 shots, right? So for a short film, it's ridiculous. Like no one would ever conceive to do that. So I did it. I flew down to Mexico City for 4 months. I worked on this film and it was the craziest thing I've ever done. I had to deal with like corrupt police trying to arrest us and steal our gear, like local gang members from the MS gang, like coming and accosting us because we shot on a lot of dangerous areas. One of the fathers of the kids we were working threatened to like murder us because the kid one day claimed that we sexually abused him on set. Like fucked up shit, man. Like crazy stuff. Way. Yeah, like so much stress. Like I had like a breakdown during the shooting. It was horrible. And when I came back and finally finished the film, I had I legit had PTSD. Like I had to deal with that stuff, right? And that's why actually what was even more messed up is when I came back after that film and I had PTSD, which I didn't know I had, right? I started working in the porn industry. So which is the worst thing to do when you have a mental health issue like PTSD. Right. So it made me even worse, man, because I'm constantly seeing that stuff. It's affecting my overall like health. Plus I already have that. So that was probably the craziest thing I did.
Man, you have some balls to go down to Mexico.
I was just desperate. I wouldn't call it courage, man. It was just desperation. And it was like a project that I crowdfunded with Kickstarter. And that added more pressure because I had like a bunch of like high level industry professionals who like pitched in like $1,000 each. So I had to make a good film because these, established filmmakers in Ontario were basically the backers, right? They're going to watch it. So that pressure was just insane. And like, I don't know if you've ever worked with kids, man. Kids do not cooperate and they have no idea how to act. They can't remember lines, nothing, right? So I had to, and like when you're working with a kid, because when you're a director and you're directing adult actors, it's 50%. I would say actually no, it's 80% the actor's job, 20% director. But with kids, it's like 80% the director's job, 20% the kid. So for a first film, it was not a good idea. However, because I threw myself into like the water with sharks without knowing how to swim, I learned how to swim really fast and really well. So like I grew faster, but I fucking traumatized myself. So it wasn't the smartest, but I don't regret it because I learned so much doing it, right?
Who'd you go down there with?
By myself, man. I just went there and I found the crew and the cast there. Yeah. So I did everything myself, and like when I found the crew and the cast, then it was okay, because I mean, if I don't speak Spanish at the time, how am I gonna be able to function, you know, to make a movie there? So, and I did learn Spanish when I was down there, so because I had to constantly work with kids that spoke no English, right?
Did you ever end up publishing it?
No, because what happened is, I think, yeah, like I was talking to this girl yesterday who's an architect from Montreal, and she talked about how she stopped doing architecture because she just couldn't cope with how much of a perfectionist she was, right? And I feel like that's kind of what I deal with too. I'm too much of a perfectionist. So I spent like 3 years editing this film, and I couldn't release it because I needed it to be perfect. But then I think the learning process was that there's no piece of work that can be perfect, right? And I mean, it's just, you can only conceive a project or a piece of work as good as you, like your growth at that moment, right? So if I knew this in hindsight, I probably would have released it within that year that I shot it, but I haven't released it until now, actually, right? And I'm probably just going to put it online in the next few months when it's finished.
It's still a 30-minute cut?
There's two versions. There's a 22-minute cut and a 30-minute, right? And I'm deciding which one I want to put online, right? Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I think we all go through that, right? With our work. Crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably one of the first like real like aspiring directors that I've met that are really down to like create film and flourish in that type of art. Yeah. Yeah, I've never like me myself. I was just like editing little videos for fun, you know, on YouTube, but I never like aspired to become like this crazy director or whatnot. But I'd be down to direct my own little short movie. You should, man. But yeah, I just don't have I don't have an idea yet, but if ever I do, yeah, I'd be down to do it. Yeah. Because the thing is, like, yeah, in order to be a media person, or I guess like even a director, like you need to know everything. Like that's what I realized about myself. I'm like, dude, I need to know how to edit, interview, direct. If you know it all, you could really like do some damage.
I mean, yeah, it helps to know it all, but at the end of the day too, like, I mean, there are directors that don't know shit, and they just hire a team to do all the other stuff they don't know, and they do it. Like, there's so many directors that did that. Like, there's a director, Sam Mendes. He did American Beauty, right? That was his first film. Before that, he was a theater director, so he doesn't know anything about camera work or editing or cinematography or film language, right? But he made an amazing first film because he hired a good team and he had a sensibility that kind of combined with that team and ended up having a good film. So you don't always have to know everything, but it helps when you're starting out because you don't have the luxury of being given a great team to work with when you first start out. Yeah. Yeah.
What are some projects that you have in the horizon besides the porno documentary?
So many. So like, I already have the next 4 feature films I want to make in my head, written from beginning to end. I know what shots I want to use. I know what music I want to use. I just have to write it and start doing it. So I want to make a feature film about 2 people that fall in love in Montreal, right? And I want to so the story kind of goes that I build up the relationship, and then the girlfriend in the relationship, when she was younger, like 19 or so, she did like, you know, 1 or 2 scenes in the porn industry to kind of pay for school or whatever, right? And the boyfriend kind of knows that happened, but he kind of ignores it because it's not a big deal. But then a seed is planted where he notices something in the relationship and he becomes kind of paranoid, and then he becomes curious and he finds that scene and he sees what she did in the scene, and that changes his entire perception of her. And I wanted to kind of like show what happens from there. Like, how does that affect the relationship? And it goes to a very dark place after, right?
Yeah, that's a boyfriend's nightmare.
Yeah, man. Because you can never see your girl the same way because of, you know, especially the way porn is done, right? So there's that. And then I want to make a film about loosely based on the Toronto van attack, right? Where the guy killed 9 people by running them over. And I want to kind of explore what led him to do that. And it's basically like a walkthrough through modern day masculinity, right? So Yeah, like I already know how it's gonna pan out. I know the stories. It's just
Is it gonna be about like incels or?
Well, it's gonna feel like it's about incels, but it's about something deeper than incels. Because even like why the guy did it, it's not just because he was an incel and he just did it, right? I mean, that's the reason he came up with, or the rationalization, or the influence that led him to do that. But I mean, it goes deeper. I mean, a lot of these guys that commit these things, the root cause is usually just social isolation and loneliness, right? And I mean, the evidence is there. The rhetoric is there. I mean, it's pretty much obvious that these are the causes of it. But then because they identify as doing it for incels or for like, you know, that kind of thing, we kind of just blame that and don't see the cause of it, right? Because I think it's much more social than it is like, you know, incels.
Yeah, like what would be your take if I was to find an incel and I would bring him on the podcast? Do you feel like I'm promoting their ideology, or do you feel like it's good that people become aware of this type of I guess ideology?
I really think it depends on how you question the person and what you bring to the podcast. So for example, if you just kind of ask them superficial, simplistic questions, then I think it doesn't really do much good. It does more harm than good. But if you try to understand why he's doing what he's doing, why he's an incel, and deconstruct his own belief system and maybe get him to realize something about himself, then I think you're doing something good. Right. So it depends how you do it, right? So I feel like most of these people, when they bring these kind of individuals on their podcasts, I don't think they're doing it right.
Right.
You know?
You have to be very competent in order to deconstruct his whole idea on a 1 hour, 2 hour podcast.
Yeah, like
you have
even
to be really good.
Exactly. And even like the issue I had with a lot of people that would interview Jordan Peterson, right? They would either attack him, right, from the left side, or they would just choose not to challenge him at all. There's no middle ground, right? And I think it kind of alludes to this black and white, all or nothing syndrome that we have in society, and just the way people's minds work, right? Sometimes it's okay to kind of be on the left, yet give someone on the right enough, you know, space for them to make their case, you know? Right. And I feel like that's something that's lacking with especially a lot of like personalities on the internet or TV or whatever, right?
Who's your favorite interviewer?
Or
one of your favorite? Besides Sam Afshinpour.
Oh man, Sam it's pretty hard to contend with Sam Afshinpour.
Yeah, Sam's on the come up. No, I'm joking.
Man, I can't even think of someone right now. No, I can't think of anyone. If it comes to mind, I'll tell you. That's how probably like how shit like people are at interviewing, that I can't even think of anyone.
Man, I want to see you interview people.
I would love to, actually. I would love to interview JP. Like I would actually, yeah.
Dude, he seems like he's quite open to the media outreach that he receives. Like he goes on like random shows. I'm like super surprised. Like, so I'm pretty sure if you have,
he just likes attention, man. Like the thing is,
but the thing is, if you write a book, you have to do all the media obligation that comes with it. And the more media coverage you have, the better it is for your book.
But okay, think of it this way. Okay, so Jordan Peterson, imagine he's a dude who has had these particular ideas for a long time, right? And he's always been rejected by all the universities and all the people, especially in Canada, because Canada is pretty freaking liberal and progressive. So being a conservative is almost kind of like difficult to be, you know, especially in the universities. So he's always being rejected, isolated, and pushed away. His ideas are always being kind of reduced, and, you know, and then, you know, he becomes a professor. He teaches for a long time. No one really takes his book seriously because he wrote his book a while ago, right?
His first book a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was there for a while, but never really sold anything. And he would just teach at, you know, universities, his ideas and his ideology. And then all of a sudden, at the age of like 50, I guess that's how old he is right now, right?
Ish, yeah.
Yeah. He's taken seriously to the point where he has the #1 bestseller in the world. He has a movement behind him. He's like a millionaire now, right? People are thinking of him like one of the greatest Canadian intellectuals in the past like decade or whatever. So he has all this attention, and for once he's like, man, my ideas are actually good. I am special, right? I am an intellectual, because he's never had real, you know, anything tangible to kind of say that, okay, my ideas are actually, you know, good, or I'm a good intellectual, whatnot, until now, right? So for that reason, obviously he's gonna soak up that attention. And I'm not saying like he wants attention like he's a Kardashian. I'm saying he wants attention like he's an intellectual. You know, it's not really about him, but it's ideas. For him, he is his ideas, and because his ideas are being taken seriously, for him, it's the best feeling in the world. He could care less about the money, I would presume, than he does care about people thinking his ideas are actually good or in, you know, morally right, I would say, right? But he's like another or whole other story. Like, I don't really like him. I don't resonate with him. I don't agree with this stuff. I think he's, like I told you, I feel like he's a con artist to himself with a lot of his stuff. And I feel like saying this is controversial because every time you challenge JP, there's like a storm of just like JP followers who just attack you and stuff. It's almost like a cult, man, and that's what's scary, right?
Yeah, I like his work, but I try to be open and try to see what the people who don't agree with him are thinking. You know what I mean? But I personally enjoyed his work, but it's been such a long time that I haven't listened to JP that it's like not as fresh in my mind as I want it to be. Yeah. But I feel like his fame was kind of accidental in the sense that he actually believed that Bill C-16 was gonna impede on the freedom of speech in Canada. Like, I really feel like he really, really believed that. Am I not talking into the mic?
No, you don't talk into the mic. You talk to the guy.
Okay, yeah. So, and some of his self-help and self-development lectures were actually, I think they were quite beneficial. You know what I mean? Like, he just talks about like getting your life together, taking responsibility for your shit and whatnot. And I feel like that resonated with me. Everything he talks about in the realm of self-development resonated with me. Now, you can argue that his politics or his view on I don't know, society isn't good. Like, you could argue that. Like, I don't know enough in order to argue for it or against it, actually. But yeah, everything he said in terms of self-development, I liked it personally.
Well, I feel like, yeah, I mean, every intellectual you listen to or every speaker, there's truth to what they say. It just depends how true it is to you and how true it is within a context, right? So, I mean, I'm not going to say that everything he said is BS. It's not, actually. Like, he's made a lot of great points. Like, when he says the left has gone too far, I'm someone that actually leans more to the left, right? But it's true. I feel like the way the left is arrogantly and like believing that what they were kind of taught and what they believe is an accurate depiction of reality, I think it's not a good way to kind of approach life, because it's the exact same structural way that people would think back in like that 1900s, you know, or even like in medieval times or whatever, right? When you think about like religion, for example, God said do this, that is absolute. Whereas like when, you know, people on the left say certain things about, I don't know, gender equality or,
I guess he was upset at the whole outrage culture that was happening online. Yeah, like everybody was just outraged about everything, and like how you're kind of doing some virtue signaling by like disagreeing with someone. Yeah, like, listen, I come from this moral high ground because I disagree with your views on fat people, and it's not fair that we say that obese people are unhealthy. You know, they have feelings too, but when you look at the facts, like being obese is not good, and there's certain things that, you know, that we have to be able to say. Without, like, as much as it's hurtful for, let's say, an obese person to hear that you know, being obese is unhealthy, but then the left would like defend the fat person and be like, no, you're fat shaming, this and that.
Well, I don't think that's not the problem. I think the word that you just used, right? I don't think it's good, or it's not good. The difference between that, right? So I think the issue with both left and right, and this is my issue with JP, is that because he believes something and he has some sort of data that confirms his bias, right? Because he interpreted the data like that, he believes that's reality, when really it's just a matter of subjective opinion, and it can be true in one instance or the other, right? So when someone tells me, for example, obesity is bad, right? And they say it with absolute conviction, like it's a universal truth, that bothers me, whether they're left or right, because, I mean, it depends how you look at it. Right? If you think of human beings as a cancer on this planet devouring the earth, obesity is not bad. Obesity is good because it's going to kill human beings, right? Right? So absolute, it's not, right? but it depends what perspective you're looking at. And I feel like we're so narcissistic as a species. We think we're so self-important, right? And everything happens for us or to us, right? That we can't escape that kind of, morality around like how our survival is so important, like, I mean, as a human being, your survival is important to you because you are a human being and you're predisposed to survive, right? But like, I think that's what my issue is, because it's like he talks about morality being absolute, and that morality is predicated in religion, and that's where we should derive our morality, right? And our values. It's good to have values, but to say that my values are absolute, that's my issue. That was the issue we had with religion from the get-go, right? And I feel like he's kind of reinforcing that with a lot of people, with the way he kind of talks about these issues, right? Like, even I told you when he said that women are more agreeable, that statement in itself is so flawed, because you're making an absolute statement, right, which is always subject to change, and also subject to context and other variables, right? I mean, if we kind of look at the, like the demographic of just feminists, are women more agreeable than men? No, they're not. Because have you ever talked to a feminist? They're not agreeable at all, right? So within that kind of context and those variables, his statement is false, right? So these are my issues with him. I just feel like he's a very poor communicator. He's very articulate, but he's a horrible communicator. Because communication is about the person that you're speaking with. You use language in a way where they can understand it, because everyone's different, right? So, for example, a scientist that I think is a great communicator is Neil deGrasse Tyson. And there's actually a podcast with him and Sam Harris, when he's giving Sam Harris flack, because he's like, yo, you need to be a bit more responsible with how you try and educate people, right? Because Sam Harris, I think, is a horrible communicator as well. He's a great, very articulate, but he just doesn't know how to put himself in another person's shoes who has a different worldview, different level of intelligence, education, things like that, right? So
yeah, he's not fun to listen to, Sam Harris.
Even like what do you call it, when he said enforced monogamy, right? No one else, like, in what world is someone going to know what enforced monogamy really means, right? Because it's a psychological term, right? Even I didn't know what it meant when he used that as a solution. So instead of like explaining or defining what it is in a accessible way for the person that hasn't read that kind of rhetoric, he just very arrogantly says the solution to incels enforce monogamy, and then there's backlash, and then they misrepresent him. So I think it's easier anyone can misrepresent anyone based on what they say, but it happens less when you're a better communicator and you use language in a way where the other person you're speaking with is understood,
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into that. But one of the flaws in his thinking that Joe Rogan pointed out was his equality of outcome, and how like he doesn't believe in equality of outcome when it comes to like hierarchies in society and like jobs and careers, but then he believes in equality of outcome when it comes to like sex, and like hooking up and
it's a paradox. I mean, that's a good example of what I mean by he has gaps in his beliefs, I guess.
But anyways, I'm gonna wrap this shit up. So,
sure.
Some other questions that I have for you. Okay, let's say if you could paint the perfect picture of the ideal Milad, what would Milad be doing?
Ideal Milad?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good question.
You on steroids. Like you as you get to paint the perfect picture of yourself, what would you be doing? Directing for big blockbuster movies or what?
This is a tricky question, because I think the moment you paint a perfect image of what you want to be, you're no longer perfect, or you're kind of stuck. You're stuck in this, like, you know what I mean?
That you're never going to get it?
Yeah. So I mean, like, what I would want to ideally be doing, sure, I want to direct movies or whatever, direct films. I think of filmmaking as therapy, so I would want to use that for that purpose. But I mean, I think it's a distinction between me just doing that and me becoming a version of myself that can do that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's the way I would phrase it. But yeah.
All right. Do you want to give a shout out to your social media or something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can follow me on Instagram at Milad the Filmmaker. I have a bunch of like stories that I post there, and I do a lot of street photography. I photograph random people and I just make stories around them, add like captions and stuff, right? So I do that. But yeah, you can see my work there.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, dude.
This was Chimp Talk. I'm your host, Sam Afshipur, and we're signing out. Peace.
Peace. Dope.